Imagine a prince who gave his throne to his best friend, a man who knew that his friend would take his father's place on the throne, and not only did not envy him, but protected him at the cost of his own life. The story of Jonathan, son of King Saul, is a story of friendship so rare that the Bible compares it to the greatest love. But few know what price this man paid for his loyalty. Today, you will learn the story of a prince who chose honor over a crown, and whose faithfulness to God proved stronger than blood ties. Jonathan was the eldest son of the first king of Israel, Saul. He grew up knowing that one day the crown would pass to him by right of primogeniture. The Bible describes him as an outstanding warrior and a man of deep faith. His name in Hebrew means God gave. And this man truly understood that everything in his life was a gift from God, including the future throne. But God was preparing a completely different path for him, a path that would test the depth of his character like few have been tested in history. The first thing we learn about Jonathan as a person from Scripture is not his position at court, but his incredible faith and courage. The Bible tells us of an event that occurred at the very beginning of his father Saul's reign. The Philistines, eternal enemies of Israel, gathered a huge army for invasion. They had 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and infantry like sand on the seashore. When the Israelites saw that they were in trouble, the people began hiding in caves, in ravines, among rocks, in towers, and in pits. Saul's army shrank to a pitiful 600 men. The rest fled in terror. And in this moment of despair, when it seemed that Israel was doomed, Jonathan does something astonishing. He takes only his armor-bearer with him and speaks to him words that reveal the very essence of his faith. "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will help us. For nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." Notice these words recorded in the first book of Samuel. Perhaps the Lord will help us. Jonathan was not a self-assured fanatic who thought God was obligated to act according to his plan. He understood that the outcome did not depend on his courage, but on God's will. But he also deeply believed that nothing is impossible for God, that the Almighty can save through two just as easily as through thousands. Two against an entire garrison. From a human perspective, this looked like suicide, like the recklessness of a young prince thirsting for glory. But Jonathan acted not from recklessness, but from faith in the living God of Israel. They agreed on a sign. If the Philistines told them to come up, this would be a sign that the Lord had given them into Israel's hands. They climbed up to the Philistine garrison, scrambling up the rocks on hands and feet on the steep slope. The Philistines, seeing them, mocked them, as recorded in Scripture. "Look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they were hiding. Come up to us, and we will show you something." For the Philistines, this was mockery. For Jonathan, it was a sign from God. He said to his armor-bearer, "Let us go up after them, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel." When Jonathan and his armor-bearer reached the summit, something incredible happened. The Bible says they killed about 20 men in the space of about half a field that a yoke of oxen might plow. And suddenly fear from God fell upon the Philistine camp. There was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The earth quaked, and there was very great terror. The Bible calls this trembling from God, a supernatural fear that the Lord sent upon the enemies of his people. The huge Philistine army came into such confusion that the warriors could not understand what was happening. In the chaos, the Philistines began turning their swords against one another. Israel won a great victory that day because God responded to the faith of one man who believed that the Lord can save through few. But this story shows us not only Jonathan's faith, it also reveals a tragic flaw in Saul's character. In the heat of battle, Saul made a foolish oath. "Cursed be the man who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." The exhausted soldiers were pursuing the enemy. They came through a forest where there was honey on the ground, but no one dared to touch it because of the king's oath. Jonathan had not heard this oath. He dipped the end of his staff into the honeycomb and ate some, and his eyes brightened. This expression, in ancient Hebrew, meant restoration of strength and clarity of mind. When one of the soldiers told him about his father's oath, Jonathan responded with words full of wisdom and even rebuke. "My father has made trouble for the land. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey. How much better it would have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies. Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been even greater?" In these words, we hear not only common sense, but understanding that Saul's oath was a mistake that weakened the army at the moment when it could have completely destroyed the enemy. But Saul was a man for whom maintaining his own authority was more important than anything. When he wanted to inquire of God about continuing the pursuit, the Lord did not answer him. Saul decided this was because of someone's sin, and he demanded to find the guilty party through casting lots. When the lot fell on Jonathan, Saul pronounced terrible words. "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." Think about this moment. The king was ready to execute his own son, the hero of the day, the man through whom God had given victory to all Israel, in order to maintain his ill-considered oath. Only the intervention of the people saved Jonathan. The soldiers said to Saul words full of justice and courage. "Should Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. This moment reveals to us the contrast between father and son, a contrast that would define all future history. Saul cared about maintaining his authority even at the cost of his innocent son's life. Jonathan acted from faith and relied on the living God. One built his kingdom on fear, oaths, and display of power. The other believed that the Lord saves not by many or by strength, but according to his will and man's faith. And this difference would only deepen with each passing year. The Bible does not tell us how long peaceful years continued after this victory, but we know that an event occurred in Jonathan's life that changed his fate forever. David appeared in his life. A young shepherd from Bethlehem, a youth with beautiful eyes and a pleasant face, as Scripture describes him. David was secretly anointed by the prophet Samuel as king instead of Saul, though almost no one knew about this. He came to Saul's court as a musician, able to calm with his playing on the harp the evil spirit that began to torment the king after the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Then the famous battle with Goliath occurred. A shepherd youth with a sling and 5 smooth stones went out against a giant in armor, armed with spear and sword. Goliath cursed David by his gods and mocked him. David answered with words of faith, "You come against me with sword and spear and shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands." One stone from the sling, and the giant fell. David took Goliath's sword and cut off his head. Israel won a great victory, and the whole country praised the name of the young hero. When the warriors returned with victory, women came out from all the cities of Israel with singing and dancing to meet King Saul. And the women sang and danced, saying, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This song pierced Saul's heart like a knife. The Bible tells us directly about the king's reaction. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. They have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And from that day on, Saul looked at David with suspicion. From this moment, envy settled in Saul's heart, which would turn into obsession and destroy him completely. But Jonathan reacted completely differently. The Bible uses amazing words to describe what happened. And the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. This was not romantic love, as some try to reinterpret today, imposing modern concepts on ancient text. In ancient Hebrew, the word used here describes the deepest brotherly bond, a spiritual kinship of souls that the Bible sets as a model of the highest friendship. This was agape, the highest form of love, selfless, sacrificial, seeking nothing for itself. Jonathan made a covenant with David, as the first book of Samuel tells us. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow and his belt. This was a symbolic act of enormous significance. The prince's robe symbolized his status as heir to the throne. The military garments, sword, bow, and belt were signs of power and strength. By giving all this to David, Jonathan was essentially acknowledging that this young man would take the place intended for him by right of birth. Think about this moment. Jonathan was not a fool who didn't understand what was happening. The prophet Samuel had anointed David. News of this likely reached the court by rumors. Victory over Goliath showed that the Lord was with David. The women's song proclaimed him a greater hero than the king himself. Anyone in Jonathan's place would have seen David as a threat, a rival, an enemy. But Jonathan saw in him God's chosen one and loved him. This decision of Jonathan reveals to us something deep about his character and faith. He understood the difference between rights given by people and will revealed by God. By human right, the crown belonged to him as the eldest son of the king. But if God chose another, who was he to oppose the Most High? The Bible does not tell us whether he had a struggle in his soul, temptation to envy, or fight for his own. But we see the result. He chose God's will and did so with joy, not with bitter submission, but with sincere love for the one God chose. When Saul, in a fit of rage, hurled a spear at David, trying to pin him to the wall, David barely managed to dodge and fled. Saul openly announced his intention. Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants to kill David. The king no longer hid his hatred. He called all his faithful people, including his own son, to join the hunt for the man he considered a threat to his throne. And here, Jonathan made a choice that determined the rest of his life. He stood between father and friend, the Bible tells us. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly loved David. And Jonathan told David, saying, "Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself." Jonathan did not simply warn David of danger. He decided to defend him, even if it meant opposing his own father. Imagine the internal struggle that Jonathan perhaps experienced. On one hand, his father, the king, a man to whom he owed honor and obedience by God's law. On the other hand, his friend, an innocent man unjustly persecuted, and whom, as Jonathan understood, God had chosen. What to do when the duty of a son contradicts the duty to justice? When obedience to father would mean participation in the murder of an innocent? Jonathan chose justice, but did so with wisdom and respect. He came to his father and interceded for David, speaking words full of wisdom and appeal to the king's conscience. Let not the king sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you, and his deeds have been very beneficial to you. He took his life in his hand and struck down the Philistine, and the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? Notice the wisdom of these words. Jonathan did not accuse his father, did not condemn him, did not threaten. He appealed to justice, to facts, to Saul's own feelings in the past. He reminded his father that David risked his life for Israel, that through him the Lord granted great salvation, that Saul himself rejoiced at this. Why then does the king now want to kill an innocent man? For a time these words worked. Saul listened to Jonathan's voice, and Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, David shall not be put to death." Jonathan called David and told him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. It seemed the crisis had passed. Reason had triumphed, relationships were restored. But this was only a temporary calm before the storm. Saul was a man obsessed with the fear of losing power. And this fear proved stronger than oath, stronger than the arguments of reason, stronger than love for his son. When David again won a victory over the Philistines, the evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul again. The king sat in his house, holding a spear in his hand, while David was playing the harp. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear. But David dodged away from Saul, and the spear struck into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent men to watch David's house and kill him in the morning. But Michal, Saul's daughter and David's wife, helped him escape. David fled and came to the prophet Samuel at Ramah. A long exile began. Years of wandering in the wilderness, when God's anointed was forced to hide from the king like a criminal. During this time, one of the most touching and important scenes in the entire story of Jonathan and David occurred. David desperately needed to know Saul's true intentions. Was reconciliation possible? Did the king really intend to kill him? Or was there still hope? He came to Jonathan secretly and said to him, "What have I done? What is my guilt and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" Jonathan, perhaps wanting to calm his friend or still hoping for the best, answered, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. Why then should my father hide this from me? It is not so." But David insisted, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David words that show the depth of his devotion. "Whatever you say, I will do for you, without conditions, without reservations." Whatever his friend needed, Jonathan was ready to do it. They worked out a plan to test Saul's intentions. The feast of the new moon was approaching when the king held a feast, and David was supposed to be present at the table. But he would not come. If Saul calmly asked about his absence, it meant there was no danger. If he became angry, it would be a sign that the decision to kill David was final. Jonathan was to give David a sign with arrows on the third day. Before parting, Jonathan spoke words that show he understood David would be king. "And if I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever." Jonathan knew his descendants would be in danger when David took power. He asked for a covenant that David would preserve his house. The Bible says Jonathan made David swear by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. When the feast of the new moon came, David did not come to the king's table. On the first day, Saul said nothing, perhaps thinking David was unclean for some reason. But on the second day, Saul asked, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered with the pre-planned version. "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers.' That is why he has not come to the king's table." Saul's reaction was horrifying and revealed the full depth of his fall. He was inflamed with anger against Jonathan. The Bible has preserved for us his words, full of venom, contempt, and curse. "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Saul not only cursed David, he insulted his own son in the most humiliating way, calling him the son of a worthless woman. He accused Jonathan of betraying his own interests, refusing the throne for the sake of friendship. And he directly said what lay at the foundation of all his hatred for David: fear that as long as the son of Jesse lives, the kingdom will not pass to his house. Jonathan asked a question full of dignity and justice. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? This was not defiance. This was an appeal to conscience, to justice, to reason. David had done nothing wrong. Why kill him? But Saul was already beyond reason and justice. In response to his son's words, the king hurled a spear, trying to pierce him. Imagine this moment of horror. A father tries to kill his son for defending an innocent man. The spear that was twice hurled at David was now thrown at his own child. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger. The Bible tells us that he did not eat food on the second day of the new moon because he grieved for David and because his father had disgraced him. Perhaps Jonathan fully realized for the first time how deeply his father had fallen, how far Saul had departed from God and from all justice. The next morning, Jonathan went out into the field, as agreed with David. He took a young servant with him and began shooting arrows, giving the conditional sign. "The arrow is beyond you, farther," he shouted to the servant, sending the signal to David that the danger was great and he needed to flee. When the servant brought the arrows and left, not knowing that all this was a sign, David came out from his hiding place. And David fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed each other and wept with each other, but David wept the most. The Bible has preserved for us this moment of parting in all its emotional power. 2 men, bound by the deepest friendship, understood that this might be their last meeting. David wept more, perhaps because he was losing not only a friend, but also the last connection with normal life, the last hope for reconciliation with the king. He was going into exile, not knowing if he would ever return. Jonathan said to him the last words before the long separation, words that carried blessing, hope, and faith. "Go in peace, that which we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.'" The Lord was witness to their covenant. God was the guarantor of their friendship and their oaths. And this covenant did not end with their lives. It extended to their offspring forever. David arose and went, and Jonathan returned to the city. A long time of separation began. David wandered through the Judean wilderness, gathered around him men who were in distress, in debt, or discontented. He hid in caves, in strongholds, sometimes even among the Philistines. Saul pursued him with 3,000 chosen warriors of Israel, and Jonathan remained in his father's palace. The Bible does not tell us details of his life during these years, but we can imagine his internal struggle. What is it like to remain with a father who tried to kill you? What is it like to serve a king who persecutes your best friend? What is it like to know that your father's cause is doomed, that God has rejected him, but to continue fulfilling your duty as son and warrior? There was one more meeting between Jonathan and David, short but deeply significant. When David was hiding in the forest of Ziph, and Saul with his army was seeking him there, the Bible says. And Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David in the forest and strengthened his hand in God. Jonathan risked leaving his father's camp and coming to the exile whom the king had declared an enemy. But he did not come empty-handed. He came to strengthen David's hand in God. This expression in ancient Hebrew means more than just comfort or encouragement. To strengthen someone's hand in God means to help them gain faith, hope, confidence in God's promises. David was exhausted by wandering, perhaps beginning to lose hope. Jonathan came to remind him of God's promises, that all that was happening was not meaningless, that God was leading him to the throne. And Jonathan said to him words of amazing faith and humility. "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you." Saul my father also knows this. Think about these words. The heir to the throne tells the fugitive shepherd, "You will be king, and I will serve under your command." This is not bitter reconciliation with the inevitable. This is joyful acceptance of God's will. Jonathan did not simply resign himself to the throne going to another. He willingly and even joyfully accepted a future where he would be second, assistant, servant of God's chosen one. Moreover, Jonathan says that even Saul knows this. The king understood that he was fighting against God's will, that his persecution of David was meaningless, that sooner or later the son of Jesse would take the throne. But Saul could not stop, could not submit, continued to fight against God and his anointed. And Jonathan made a covenant with David again, for he loved him as his own soul. Again they bound themselves by covenant before the Lord. And they parted. Jonathan went to the city, and David remained in the forest. Time passed. Saul continued to pursue David, but the Lord preserved his anointed. Twice David had the opportunity to kill Saul but refused, saying, "Who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" David believed God would deal with Saul in his own time. Then came the final act of the tragedy of Saul's house. The Philistines gathered all their forces for a great battle against Israel. 5 rulers of Philistine cities united their armies. This was the largest invasion in many years. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. The warrior king, who had fought Israel's enemies for many years, suddenly felt fear, a premonition of impending doom. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him. Heaven was silent. In desperation, Saul went to a forbidden medium at Endor to summon the spirit of Samuel. When the spirit appeared, it spoke words like a death sentence. "Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me, and the Lord will give Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me." A death sentence not only for Saul, but also for his sons, including Jonathan. Saul fell to the ground, filled with fear. He knew that tomorrow he would die. He knew that his sons would perish, and he could do nothing about it. The battle on Mount Gilboa became a catastrophe for Israel. The Philistines overtook the Israelites, and they fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. The Bible names them by name. And the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. 3 sons of the king died in battle. Jonathan, heir to the throne, man of great faith and selfless friendship, fell on the battlefield. We do not know the details of his death, but we know he died defending his father's kingdom, a kingdom he knew was doomed. Jonathan could have gone to David long before this battle. David would have welcomed him with joy and protected him. But Jonathan remained with his father to the end. Perhaps he still hoped to influence Saul, or felt the duty of a son required him to stay. We do not know his thoughts, but we know his choice. He stayed and paid for it with his life. Saul was badly wounded by the archers. He said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Then Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. The first king of Israel took his own life on the battlefield, defeated by enemies, forsaken by God, surrounded by the bodies of his sons. When David learned of the deaths of Saul and Jonathan, he tore his clothes, and all the men with him did the same. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David did not rejoice that the path to the throne was now open. He sincerely grieved for the king who had hunted his life so long, and for the friend he loved more than anything in the world. David wrote one of the most touching and beautiful laments in all the Bible. He commanded that the sons of Judah be taught this lament, so that the memory of Saul and Jonathan would be preserved among the people. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of women. This is not a romantic comparison, as some modern interpreters try to reinterpret. This is an acknowledgement that Jonathan's friendship was selfless, sacrificial, completely unselfish, which even the deepest romantic love between a man and a woman can rarely boast. Romantic love often seeks its own, expects reciprocity, demands attention. Jonathan loved David expecting nothing in return. He gave him his throne, protected him from his father, risked his life for him, strengthened his faith in the darkest moments. He loved David more than himself, more than his future, more than the crown. This is what David meant when he said this love was more wonderful than the love of women. But Jonathan's story does not end with his death. The covenant he made with David continued to operate, protecting his offspring. Jonathan had a son, a boy named Mephibosheth. When news came of the death of Saul and Jonathan in the battle at Gilboa, the nurse grabbed the 5-year-old child and ran, saving him. In haste and fear, she dropped him, and he fell and remained lame in both feet for life. Mephibosheth grew up in exile at a place called Lo-Debar. He lived in fear, believing that the new King David would sooner or later find him and kill him, as was customary in the ancient world with remnants of overthrown dynasties. He was lame, helpless, lived on the mercy of strangers, in constant fear for his life. But David did not forget his covenant with Jonathan. Years passed. David was established on the throne, defeated all the enemies of Israel, expanded the borders of the kingdom. His power was secure. He was no longer threatened by danger from Saul's house. And in these years of peace and prosperity, David remembered his friend. One day King David asked, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" They found Mephibosheth, and the crippled young man came to the king expecting death. but David spoke words that changed his life. "Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather, and you shall eat at my table always." Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem and ate at the king's table as one of the king's sons for the rest of David's life. Jonathan's covenant with David continued to operate even after his death, blessing his offspring. The memory of Jonathan's faithfulness was so strong that David could not do otherwise. What does Jonathan's story reveal? It shows us a man who understood the difference between rights given by people and will revealed by God. By human right, the crown belonged to him, but he knew God had chosen another. Jonathan teaches us true humility born from deep faith in God's sovereignty. He could have fought for his right, but he joyfully yielded place to God's chosen one. Jonathan shows us what true friendship is. In a world where relationships are built on mutual benefit, Jonathan loved David knowing it would cost him the throne. He defended him against his own father. He loved with selfless love that expected nothing in return, that rejoiced in his friend's success even when it meant his own diminishment. The story reveals the tragedy of disobedience through the contrast between Jonathan and Saul. Saul began as a humble man, chosen by God, but pride and fear destroyed him. The contrast shows us two roads. One leads to fall through disobedience and clinging to power. The other leads to honor through faith and willingness to follow God's will. Jonathan teaches us faithfulness in hopeless circumstances. He remained with his father to the end, knowing Saul's cause was doomed. He did not betray his father, even when his father tried to kill him. This was faithfulness to principles above circumstances. Faithfulness to relationships, even when they become painful. The most astonishing thing is that Jonathan never became king, yet his memory is honored more than many kings. He left no dynasty, but he left an example that has inspired people for thousands of years. He built relationships based on a covenant before God, relationships that survived death and blessed the next generation. Jonathan's story reminds us that greatness is measured not by position, wealth, or fame, but by character, especially when it costs us something valuable. True love does not seek its own, but rejoices in the beloved's success. Faithfulness to God is more important than any earthly ambitions. Friendship based on a covenant before the Lord is stronger than death and blesses generations. Jonathan lived not for himself, but to fulfill God's will and bless those he loved. He gave David his robe, his sword, his throne, his protection, his faithfulness. He received nothing in return in an earthly sense, but he received what has eternal value. He received the love of a friend who mourned him and protected his son. He received a memory that lives for millennia. And most importantly, he received the approval of God, who saw his faithful heart. Jonathan, son of Saul, a prince who gave the crown to a friend and died defending his father's kingdom. God used his life to show us what a man of faith should be. His example speaks to us today about true greatness, humility before God's will, faithfulness in trials, sacrificial love. In a world where everyone fights for their place, where people trample others for advancement, where friendship becomes a mask for use, Jonathan's story shines as a beacon pointing to another way, the way of faith, love, and faithfulness that leads to true honor and eternal memory. If this story touched your heart, if you saw in Jonathan an example of what a man of faith can be, share this video with those who need a reminder of what true friendship, faithfulness, and sacrificial love are. Subscribe to the channel, to learn more forgotten stories of the Bible. Stories that can change your view of faith, relationships, and what is truly important in life. Leave in the comments what touched you most in Jonathan's story, what lesson you drew for yourself. Until we meet again, and may the Lord bless you.